You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast featuring some of Indiana's most fascinating men and women whose impact has shaped our state, our communities, and us. Join us as we discuss their imprint on our history. Leaders and Legends is brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated, your local veteran business enterprise specializing in public relations, media relations, public outreach, crisis communications, and digital photography. My name is Robert Payne, Principal of Veteran Strategies, former Deputy Chief of Staff to Mayor Greg Ballard, and Communications Director for the Indiana Republican Party. I'm honored to be your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, the Crown Plaza Hotel, Grand Hall, and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the law firm of Bose, McKinney & Evans, and the Bose Public Affairs Group, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. It's a special podcast. Our guest today is Tony Mason, CEO, Indianapolis Urban League. He has been involved in so many things, we can't even begin to talk about all of them. He is a proud Miami of Ohio grad, like my friend Derek Ruddleman, if you happen to be listening, and other folks. He's on with us today to talk about Indianapolis, the broader conversation we're having at the moment. The co-host today is Brian Payne, former Leaders and Legends podcast guest, a living legend, according to the Indiana Historical Society, and a good friend. And we're going to turn the podcast over to him to start the conversation with Tony. But before we do that, I'd like to have a quick moment of silence. We lost someone, Marion County Constable, former Center Township Constable, Tony Duncan. He was a good man. He let me know where he stood many times with a smile on his face, as I told my buddy Joel Miller. Tony was the best smack talker in Indiana politics, and every conversation I had with him started with, "Hey, Vane, come here." And I'm pretty sure I obeyed him every single time. But he did it all with a smile on his face, and he was a mentor to many, many people. So for just a few seconds, we're going to fall silent in his memory. Brian?
Thanks, Robert. It's a great pleasure to be with you again, and I'm honored to be the co-host of this session with Tony Mason, who through his leadership, he personally and the Indianapolis Urban League have become very important friends, partners, colleagues to me personally and to Central Indiana Community Foundation. So, Tony, thanks for making the time in a moment in which your leadership is more important than ever, and I know you're as busy or busier than you've ever been. So thanks for carving out some time with us today.
Brian and Robert, thank you both for having me.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
First of all, the Indianapolis Urban League is, this has kind of this storied history, both, the Urban League nationally and Indianapolis Urban League locally. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Urban League, how long it's been around, and
Sure.
The mission, and kind of how the Urban League got to this moment.
Sure. Well, the Indianapolis Urban League was founded here in 1965. And we had a number of great leaders here, like Attorney Henry Richardson, Dr. Tom Benford, Faye Williams, and a number of others who played a role in bringing the affiliate here. And so I am essentially the third president and CEO of the organization, the first being the late, great Sam Jones, and then my predecessor, Mr. Joe Slash, who was our city's first African-American deputy mayor. And so our mission here is to assist African-Americans, other minorities, and disadvantaged individuals with achieving economic and social equality. And we do that through programming and services that we deliver on a daily basis with support from CICF and numerous funders in the community, with an emphasis on workforce development, education, health and wellness, family assistance, which includes emergency rent and utility services and supports, if you will, And then we also advocate on a number of issues. We are one of 95 Urban League affiliates nationwide. And so we're part of this larger movement, if you will. And the National Urban League itself was founded in 1910 by Ruth Standish Baldwin and Dr. George Edmund Haynes. It took on the name of the National Urban League in 1920. And so the idea was to help blacks or African Americans, many who were migrating from the South to urban centers all across the country. And so the Urban League historically has played a role in helping blacks and African Americans and others to achieve self-sufficiency through a number of means. Oftentimes people, when they think of the National Urban League or they think of the Indianapolis Urban League, they only think of advocacy and not necessarily all of the things that we do each and every day to help people in this community.
Was Indianapolis kind of a late comer on the National Urban League scene? I mean, I know we had the great migration of African Americans into, Indianapolis, well before 1965. Do you know anything about why we were late as a city in getting a chapter?
Well, I think Indianapolis has always somewhat moved at its own pace, and typically when we're ready to do things here, we do it in a big way, and I'm sure there had to be some connections to timing around supports across the broader community, if you will. So I would say that the African American community would have felt that it should have been here much sooner. But as you know, we negotiate things here, and in due time, we're able to get broad civic engagement and support. And, you can't underestimate the importance of the role of someone like Dr. Tom Benford in that process.
Right. And also 1965,
yes,
as the civil rights movement was in its, its peak moments,
yes,
probably was a part of the final catalyst to get that done.
Absolutely.
Tony, I first met you when you were, working on major sporting events. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your personal and professional journey into this important leadership position?
Yeah, absolutely. For many people in the community, some are aware of my involvement with Circle City Classic and also with the 2012 Indianapolis Super Bowl host committee. I had the good fortune of being the executive director of Circle City Classic for 8 years. And so I, remember those as great times and a lot of wonderful football games, parades, and things that ultimately really was about raising funds to support the Indiana Black Expo Circle City Classic scholarship program. And so we were able to award millions of dollars through that. And then the economic impact to the city of Indianapolis was major as well at that time, as we typically average anywhere near 45 to 50,000 fans per game. The Super Bowl experience was a dream come true because I could have never imagined that I would be a part of the team and staff that would play a role in administering a Super Bowl in our city. I mean, I grew up in the Chicago area, so I get to tease my friends about the fact that Indianapolis actually beat Chicago to doing something on such a grand scale. But early in my career, I actually came out of recreational sports and out of the college and university setting. And so what essentially led me here, my alma mater is Miami of Ohio. I was serving as assistant director of recreational sports on campus there. And then my wife and I, we were expecting our first child. And what was unique about our situation was that we were living in Newcastle, Indiana. And so I was commuting to Ohio. She was commuting here to Indy, where she worked at Eli Lilly & Co. as a microbiologist. And so I had gotten used to, for 2 years, living on Central Standard Time and working Eastern Standard Time. And I said, this is not going to work with a baby.
Yeah.
So because I'm the one who typically can survive on 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night, not Joy. She has to have a full 7 or 8 hours. So we made the move here. I ended up with the Amateur Athletic Union, the AAU. And for many in our community, they may not remember that the AAU was located out off of West 86th Street. And I do believe it might be an Office Depot or a Staples that now sits on the property that was the national headquarters. And so I had the opportunity there to administer all of the national championships for the team sports, including boys basketball. So I presided over the championship. I got to see Jermaine O'Neal as a high school player.
Wow.
And I could go down the list of all of the greats that went on to play in the NBA and all of that great stuff. So that landed me here. I subsequently ended up working at Indiana Black Expo with the late Reverend Charles Williams as the Director of Family and Youth Programs, and then on to the NCAA, which when they relocated here, I had the opportunity to work with them after having administered the National Youth Sports Program in my very first job out of grad school, which was at Wichita State. So the very individuals that I worked with in 1989 and 90, when I was out in Kansas, actually walked through the front door at Expo to volunteer when the NCAA relocated here.
Wow.
So it's funny how things connect, your experiences, and, there's, 2 degrees of separation, not 6 degrees.
Right. That's great. What a great set of experiences to lead you to this moment. Mm-hmm. And, here we are in June of 2020. And
yes.
2020 is going to be one of these years that gets looked at from lots of different angles, I believe, for the next 50 years, right? I mean, we remember 1968, and I think, 50 years from now, people will talk about 2020 with COVID-19, pandemic, yes. And now, the tipping point of George Floyd's death.
Yes.
And so you're in, you've got a huge role to play, and you're playing it, but how is this changing, your thinking and the Urban League's priorities and programs? I mean, things are moving. It seems like to me, like every 3 days we have a whole new world to react to.
Yes.
And so how are you guys thinking about the role that you played? I mean, you were very good about telling us about all these different things that the
Sure.
Urban League has been doing. What are your thoughts about how does that change? As the balance change? What are you guys thinking?
Well, let me tell you, I think we all had to adjust with the COVID-19 pandemic. I know for us here locally, we were trying to figure out how we were going to quickly transition to a remote operation because, a lot of nonprofits, we do not necessarily have all the resources to outfit a staff the way we need to. So we had to buy all brand new laptops because we had a hodgepodge of donated equipment. We didn't have matching software packages, operating systems. And so we had to stand up our operation to be able to function remotely. But then 2 days before we were going to transition, I got a call from several senior living communities that said, look, we're worried about how we're going to eat. And so I made calls to Gleaners, Second Helpings, and others, and to try to make sure that the issue was on their radar. And got those senior living communities partnering with those entities to deal with food access, if you will. And the next thing I know, I'm getting calls from the community at large. And so we quickly had to take on the role of being one of those organizations that in a very visible way would do food distribution. And so for the past 8 weeks, we have been doing drive-through food distributions at the Urban League. That's not normally a space that we operate in, where we're providing food boxes, meal supplies. We partnered last week with Samaritan's Feet to distribute shoes to kids and adults and families. We've done gift cards, everything, because we recognize that with essentially over 600,000 Hoosiers filing for unemployment, at least 100,000 or so in the Indianapolis area, that people are without jobs, without income. And, we can all become quite jaded and take something as simple as having dinner for granted. And so we've taken on a major role. And I can tell you that we probably have distributed meals and supplies to nearly 15,000 families now. And that includes an awful lot of children. Along the way, with other COVID relief efforts, we've paid a lot of rent, mortgages, utilities, cable bills, car payments, things that are allowing families to at least sustain themselves during this challenging period. It's a role we take on because that's, in some ways, it's just an extension of what we were always doing. We just weren't doing food, if you will. We were doing the other things. through our work with our Center for Working Families. Now, with respect to the protests that we are seeing, not just here in Indianapolis, but across the nation, well, the Urban League has had a long history, and throughout its history has advocated for everything from civil rights and racial justice to civic engagement and leadership empowerment and all these things that we see happening right now. We look out and we see our younger leaders across this community and across the nation, if you will, in a multiracial gathering, if you will, in this fight for civil rights and police reform. But at the Urban League, my initial introduction to the Urban League was through the Young Professionals Group. At that time, I was the executive director of the Circle City Classic, and Joe Slash was what I would refer to as one of my 9 bosses at Circle City Classic. And he says, "Tony, I want you to come to this meeting at the Urban League where I'm going to be talking about this new concept the National Urban League wants to roll out." And it was the Young Professionals. This was probably a couple of weeks before Classic, and I was exhausted, and I dozed off in the meeting and woke up, and they were having an election, and they said, "Well, Tony, you probably should be the first president since more people know you than know the rest of us." And so I was one of the founding members and the first president of the very first Young Professionals entity, and it's so fitting now that Adrienne Slash, Joe's daughter, would be the leader of that group, and she's worked hard to develop a broad engagement across this community so that participants in the exchange at the Urban League are not just Black. It's white, it's Latinos, you name it. And they're doing everything from servant leadership, training, to just getting involved in the community. And as I've shared with them, all I care about is that you not only serve the Urban League, but you serve all sorts of causes and organizations that are working hard to make a difference across Indy. And so for us, it's continuing to lean in. And in my role in particular, the past couple of weeks, I've had to convene and facilitate a number of, I think, very, very important meetings where we're trying to make sure that people remain focused on not just the need for police reform and accountability, but also for all of us to lean in on all of the root cause systemic issues that essentially have created these two existences for our city, these two realities where the data tells us the African American community here, 28% of the population is poor. United Way data tells us that nearly 40% of families in Indianapolis and central Indiana are either poor or working poor. We know the Brookings Institute data tells us we got a lot of work to do around jobs with good wages and making sure that those trickle down throughout the community. And so a lot of what we see peaceful protesters, they're very diverse, and they're doing just that. They're being peaceful in protest. Now, are there individuals out there that are using this as an occasion to undermine what is a good agenda, if you will? Absolutely. And so when we think about the damage, the looting, and things of that nature, I think we have to be careful to stay focused on the challenges that we know that are very real in this community that require a lot of time, attention, and work. Because we have too many people in our city that are struggling.
I want to kind of before I go to a kind of a broader question around, is this an opportunity in your mind for accelerated positive change? Because so I do want to go there, but
yes,
I do really want to focus on the young professionals. So
yes,
it's called the exchange.
The exchange.
And what is the age group of the exchange?
21 to 40.
Okay,
21 to the age of 40.
And we're big fans of Adrienne Slash.
Oh, we are. Yes, we are.
We are big. I worked with her at State Party. Her father is a pioneer, an amazing man, and
yes,
didn't mean to interrupt you, but we are big fans of Adrienne and the work she's trying to do. She is magnificent.
Well, Joe is a mentor to me and is on our advisory committee for our race and equity work at CICF. And then Adrian is, I'm taking credit for both of them at this point. How's that? How rude is that? But I'm just throwing their names around for my own cred. We have 10 Indianapolis Foundation Fellows from our 100th anniversary in 2016. And Adrian is one of our fellows. And so she represents, it doesn't really represent us. We helped give her resources to play a huge role as an important Visit Indy board member. And as one of our young professionals that we wanted to hold up and help support on major boards around the community. So yeah, we love the Slash family for sure.
Yes.
So younger people are playing, as you said, playing a huge role in your organization, but also in these protests.
Yes.
What do you think Indianapolis should do to engage more young people at the tables and seats of power? Do you have a vision for, you guys are doing a great job of that, but what could we do as a community, Indianapolis, Central Indiana, to put more 20-somethings and 30-somethings in real positions of power? Do you have some thoughts about what that could look like?
Yes, absolutely. I have to tell you, I think that now more than ever, we have to be genuine and authentic in our willingness to embrace them and their voices at our respective tables. And we have to do that knowing that when they come through our doors, they're not necessarily coming through our doors to agree with everything we say or to do things as we would probably, how we would approach them, if you will. But everyone has a role to play, and I think for us, it's not just attracting millennials and or younger generations, but understanding that Adrian Slash and many of the young professionals that are involved in the exchange only represent perhaps what might be considered a professional and or middle class subset, if you will. Part of what we're hearing in terms of criticism is the desire that millennials and younger leaders in the community from all walks, so not just grass tops, but grassroots, would be involved and be at the table as well. Because now more than ever, they've got a story to tell as well. And much of the anger and frustration that we see rooted in what is transpiring here and in cities all across America is the fact that, we do have this underclass, if you will. We've got neighborhoods, we've got situations that have been void of investment for years. And while we're in a lot of rooms talking about inclusive economics and all of the things that need to happen, they very much now need to be a part of those discussions so that we really, truly understand. So interestingly enough, over the past 2 weeks, and in particular last week, I have been a part of trying to make sure that other young leaders in this community, such as D. Ross, with the D. Ross Foundation, James Wilson with Circle Up Indy, representatives from Indy 10, Black Lives Matters, and others are part of discussions with the Race and Cultural Relations Leadership Network. And then there are going to be some this week with corporate leaders as well as representatives and individuals that are associated with the United Way of Central Indiana. Because again, we all have good intentions, but imagine if you were never at the table for any of these conversations or discussions. And so you imagine how that lands. And what I'm learning through this process is that we have some amazing young leaders that have never really had the opportunity to be at the table. And they may have the idea or the solution that may make sense in many cases. And sometimes it may not be what we think it is. So I think we have the opportunity to be open to that, whether it's through the work of CICF, whether it's the Greater Indianapolis Progress Committee and the Race and Cultural Relations and Leadership Network, the Urban League, and all of the other organizations and or institutions out there that are trying to do a lot of work, a lot of heavy lifting to help people.
Would you Do you think other not-for-profits? You're spending a lot of time as a not-for-profit, as a leader of a not-for-profit, focusing on this. Do you think every not-for-profit should, at this moment in time, should be reevaluating how it might engage, people in their 20s, 30s, and a lot of times, right?
Yes,
organizations have had young professional organizations, which, might some way considered a training ground or an engagement strategy. Mm-hmm. But is it time to put more young 20-somethings and 30-somethings on the real board as opposed to the young professionals board? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I absolutely think it is time for that. And not just with nonprofits, because I've heard several conversations over the past couple of days about issues in the nonprofit sector. The real challenge ultimately is long-term, sustained investment in all of these areas that need attention, whether it be underfunded or under-resourced schools, a lack of affordable housing, livable wages, whether it's access to free training for jobs and the things that we know that are coming. And I know there are bits and pieces of this that are happening, whether it be by the city, the state, or others. But the resources need to be there, because there's nothing like having empty conversations, if you will, where we can have great initiatives and we can stand in front of the whiteboard and talk about what our aspirations are. But if it's not coupled with deep investment, then it becomes discouraging, not only for, the nonprofits, but the volunteers or anyone that's sitting at that table. And I've been a part of those conversations. I've been a part of the ones where there's committed investment, whether it's our major sporting events, and that the dollars are going to be there. And then I've also been a part of discussions that have involved nonprofit efforts where, okay, we're going to figure this out. How many of you can reorient portions of your budgets to accommodate these goals? Well, if I'm the president and CEO of the Urban League, and I am, that becomes a real challenge for me, because I might be struggling to meet payroll. And now you're asking me to reorient my budget to help with an aspect of a project that may not have been a part of the budget to begin with. So I like the fact that everyone's leaning in. We've got corporate leaders that are leaning in, and they want to hear from our young leaders, as well as leaders from the nonprofit sector. So I think it's a good thing. And if it took a lot of circumstances to bring us here today, then maybe we'll be better for it when we come through this moment in time. But I just urge people to remember that, while we've all watched in angst and in sorrow the murder of George Floyd, we're really talking about 400 years of bigotry, oppression, systemic racism, and it's been all brought to bear in this particular moment, So we saw that, and we felt it in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and I think we're seeing this again. And people forget that during the civil rights era, there were young people at sit-ins and at counters that were leading protests and demonstrations. If anyone's symbolic of that, is Representative John Lewis. So we still have work to do, and we can. We just have to be really committed now, because we've got younger generations that will not accept incremental change. They want substantial change.
I've heard a lot of people, this is a generalization that I think I buy into as well, but it's more anecdotal about, that millennials maybe are more, more I don't know, naturally is the right word, but they're more multicultural in their outlook and anti-racist in their outlook than maybe other generations that still exist. Do you think that's true? I mean, if you look at, white young, white 20-somethings and 30-somethings, do you have a sense that maybe that generation is more anti-racist and more respectful of people of color and work, and more committed to social justice or than than generations before? Or is it just that they're young and idealistic and we haven't ruined them yet? I mean, what's your perspective of the younger generation? A lot of people think that there's great hope with them. I want to believe that. I have a tendency to believe it, but I'd love for you to weigh in on that.
Sure. I want to be hopeful because when I see the protesters and I see the diversity there, and on Saturday on the State House lawn, there were arguably more white people there than black people. But I'm also reminded of what I saw in Charlottesville when I saw the young white men in their khakis that were marching and were shouting their racial epithets and their anti-Semitic remarks. And so I know that that's not the case everywhere. But, we have reason to be hopeful based on what we're seeing, because I see volunteers and protesters, people that are coming down, providing meals and supporting the protesters in their efforts. I'm witness to white protesters being told, part of your role here is to stand in between the police officers and the black people, because they're less likely to assault you or to do something to you than they would a black person. And so I'm getting to witness and see a lot of these things. So, I want to be hopeful, and I think it's going to take all of us being just that. I don't think we can afford to not be hopeful. I don't think we can afford to sit still and not do anything.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, the Crown Plaza Hotel, Grand Hall, and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the law firm of Bose, McKinney, and Evans, and the Bose Public Affairs Group, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. Our guest is Tony Mason, President and CEO, Urban League of Indianapolis. Our co-host is Brian Payne, CEO and President of the Central Indiana Community Foundation. Thank you, Brian, for that quick intro and all the great questions.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it.
Let me ask you, Tony, quickly, is there a Hoosier leader or legend you particularly admire?
Oh, wow. There's a few. I had the good fortune in my career of being able to count the late Reverend Charles Williams as a mentor, the late Bill Mays as a mentor, of course, Joe Slash, George Pillow. I could go down the list of individuals that, I've had the pleasure and privilege of working with and working for. Allison Millington out at the Motor Speedway and Mark Miles. I've learned so much from each and every one of them, and there are others that I could name, of course. But the fact that they were willing to embrace me in different roles and pour into me, they're part of the reason why I am who I am today. The late Bill Crawford as well. Just individuals that were committed to making sure that the community could potentially be the best version of itself and to make a difference in the lives for so many.
Charles Williams is one of the greatest problem solvers I ever witnessed. It's amazing how he could make people happy, yes, solve problems on both a small and, I didn't know him well, but just on a, yes, tactical and strategic level. He solved problems, yes, and did it with a smile. And people would walk away going, okay, I get it. That makes sense.
Yes.
One of the things that you were heavily involved in was the Super Bowl, yes, project. Mm-hmm. And it was probably the greatest coming together in the history of this city, for sure. Something that, I've asked whether it was Ted Boehm or Jim Morris or, other people, like, if I had told, they were talking about some meeting in 1979 or 1980, or Joe Slash or David Frick, where I'm like, if I had told you in 2012, Indianapolis would completely redefine the Super Bowl for the entire league and the entire country, you would have said, and they all go, no chance, like not Indianapolis. But one of the things that Indianapolis did, which I believe was the first time it had been done, was the concept of a legacy project. Mm-hmm. And the legacy project ended up being over by Tech.
Yes.
Which is not as great a IPS high school as Howe, which is where I went, but it's pretty darn close. And so talk a little bit about the legacy project.
Sure. Why
that was important, the impact it has, and then I want to quickly kind of bring in the general subject of education as impactful both now and as part of the greater conversation and the greater push for good that we're all looking for.
Yes. Well, a little bit about the Legacy Project. And I have to tell you, when Allison asked me to come aboard to be a part of the team, and when she mentioned the Legacy Project, for me in my mind at that moment, I was just excited about the opportunity. The idea that you would undertake a legacy project that would help to energize the neighborhood quality of life plan for an entire area of our community, and how we would ultimately leverage a $1 million matching grant from the NFL that would lead to over $150 million in investment, with everything from revitalized new homes to infrastructure, streetscape work, to a number of amenities in that now exist in that neighborhood that were not there prior to that time. And again, I want to be careful to say the legacy project for the Super Bowl, it came alongside the work that neighborhood was attempting to do. And I think we got to see what could be accomplished when larger, broader community leaders would engage at a neighborhood-based level, but help drive a plan developed by the neighborhood. So amazing leaders on the Near East Side, like James Taylor at the Bonner Center, and the great work that they have historically done on the Near East Side, but just the leadership that he provided. And now when you drive down East 10th Street, you see the change in a very big and visible sort of way. And yes, they still have a lot of work to do, but I think that's typically the case when you start talking about the revitalization efforts of an entire neighborhood, and knowing that there were a lot of obstacles and hurdles to overcome, a lot of naysayers. Right now, sadly, I encounter people that think that nothing ever happened on the Near East Side. And so, you need to go take a look, go over to Tech's campus and to visit the Chase Near East Side Legacy Center, which obviously turned out to be an amazing blessing, not only for Tech High School, but the entire neighborhood. And to just know that when we look back, we'll say that for, that neighborhood, the Super Bowl was a sea change moment. Now how we make sure that people can continue to live there and age in place. We know those are different challenges that will have to be addressed and dealt with. But there's something to be learned from that effort on the Near East Side of what can happen when you have public, private, and nonprofit partnerships all working together to advance a quality of life plan. It was an amazing, amazing experience. And I learned a lot from that experience that somewhat helped me in this role, and then developing the relationships with the James Taylors and others who run community centers, which a lot of the work that we do somewhat mirrors what they do as well, beyond our advocacy work.
Shepherd Community Center is another one.
Yes.
In the old Sahara Grotto. Mm-hmm. We went to a wedding or two there in the 70s, but what's happening at the Shepherd Community Center right off East Washington Street is just terrific. Yep. Part of your career, your personal history, just from, I'm lucky enough to have known you for several years now.
Yes.
And then reading through your biography, you have 2 college degrees. How many does your wife have?
She has 2.
Microbiology?
Yes, microbiology from Miami of Ohio, and then pharmaceutical sciences from Butler University.
She's also a black belt in Six Sigma
black belt. She's really smart.
Well, I was just getting ready to say, actually, the whole point of that was to lead up to the fact that you probably don't win any arguments at home.
No, I don't win any at home. I don't.
But clearly, education has made a difference in your life.
Yes.
As it has with mine and with everybody who pursues that.
Yes.
And a lot of us do it, quite frankly, because we don't have any other way.
Yes.
This is my chance. Mm-hmm. For me personally, my only chance growing up on the East Side was join the military, afford college, get some degrees, and work your tail off and be loyal, and hopefully good things will happen.
Yes.
You have done so much for education in this city, not just the Urban League. Mm-hmm. Tony Mason has. When you look at something like the Circle Center Classic, do you think it gets shortchanged because there's a lot of focus on the game, but not enough focus on the legacy of the Classic itself? Talk a little bit about the educational legacy of the Circle Center Classic effort.
Mm-hmm. So with Circle City Classic, people have to go back, I guess, in time to remember that the late Reverend Charles Williams was the visionary founder of that effort. But a key part of the partnership that existed in the community involved a partnership with the Indianapolis Black Alumni Council. And so each year, IBAC hosts its annual Black College Fair. And historically, what has transpired is nearly 60 to 70 historical Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, would attend. And on that evening, typically Thursday evening before Circle City Classic, they would have representatives on hand. And I cannot recall a year during my tenure where less than $2 million in scholarships were awarded on that evening. So imagine a student coming to something that arguably maybe their parents dragged them to it. And make sure you've got your transcripts with you. And here's an admissions director telling you on the spot, you're admitted, we're going to give you a full scholarship for 4 years. Imagine what that meant for so many young people in this community, some whom are probably community leaders right now because of that experience. And so you're talking about millions of dollars alone through the Indianapolis Black Alumni Council. You're also talking about the dollars that then from Classic went into Indiana Black Expo and Circle City Classic to award not only to students in Indianapolis, but as you know, Indiana Black Expo has 12 or 13 chapter cities across the state. So those resources were also reaching students all across the state of Indiana, making it possible for them to go to colleges. And so while the game certainly got its lion's share of the attention in most years, we know that ultimately it was, as you like to say, a party with a purpose. Mm. We also, for years, partnered with Tom Joyner and the things that he was doing to promote education and particularly to support historical Black colleges and universities. And so I know through the Classic, we had an amazing impact on young people. Education was important to me in part because, and Brian may know a little bit about this, and my mother had my older brother when she was 14. She did not earn her GED until she got into her 50s. She put my brother through Yale undergraduate and Case Western Law. Mm. She obviously put me through Miami of Ohio, where I got both of my degrees. Now, I might have gotten the short end of that deal based on those schools, but I love my alma mater, and I love my brother as well. But she taught us the importance of education, that A, would be something no one could ever take away from you, and that B, it might position you for opportunities. And so I would say for people out there right now that tend to, sometimes you hear messages that are devaluing the importance of education, and particularly post-secondary education. I wish we would stop that because we don't know which young person will buy into that message that could have become a future mayor, a future business owner, a future Urban League president. Education is crucial. And I think if we're all being honest with ourselves, we're not going to hire someone that either doesn't have the education, training, or some specialized expertise that says they can be an asset to my organization or my company.
You know, I have a son who's going to be 31 in a couple months. Mm-hmm. And he came out of high school and he just didn't want to go to college. College to him was Shakespeare and chemistry and that sort of stuff. He just didn't want any part of it.
Yes.
So he joined the military and he ended up serving 2 tours in Afghanistan. Came back and his wife, they had twin girls, which I'll happily show you a picture of.
All right.
And that was his contribution not only to the country, but to society. Mm-hmm. The military, to me, is the greatest opportunity for anyone. Mm-hmm. I used to go on the Amos Brown show quite a bit, and it was always somewhat fun and always feisty, But I had a great friendship with him, and I miss him.
Same here. I miss him too.
And the one thing, we would fuss about whatever I was brought on to fuss about.
Yes.
But the point I always made and will make to the day I die is that the African American community in this country is among, if not the greatest example of patriotism and service that you will find in America. When you talk about preparing to lead, where do you think serving in the military fits in that puzzle?
Serving in the military fits into that puzzle for some, perhaps maybe not for all, because we know that for many African Americans or blacks across the country, the military may be their only option, depending on their family situation and their finances. And so going to the military, learning how to lead, learning how to serve, learning or developing a skill and getting training that when they come back to their communities, that would position them for job opportunities and the opportunity to make a decent living and to take care of their families is important. And so I don't think anyone should rule out participation in the military. And you're absolutely right. When you talk about blacks in the military, because we know that for many, when they return from their tours of duty, they were not always received at all. Or
Spike Lee has
well.
a new documentary about that right now.
And yet many of them entered the military knowing that when they came back, things might not be different here in America. And so that takes an awful lot of commitment. And we have to acknowledge we've come a long way, yet we know we still obviously have a lot of work to do. But I encourage our young people to consider whether it's post-secondary, college training, military, but do something. Do something that prepares you for the future. Because again, right now we're living in an economy and in a society where I do believe I saw a statistic that said here very soon at least 60% of the jobs are going to require some level of post-secondary education and training. The number might actually be higher. But just graduating from high school is not enough now.
Employ, enroll, enlist.
That's right.
That's the phrase that's being used that I think hits it right on the money. One more quick question before I turn it back over to Brian to kind of pull everything together.
Sure.
I actually had in my notes before we came here about young people.
Yes.
Any history of the civil rights movement, the modern civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, it's the young people you see. And it's a bottom-up revolution. Any history of it will show it's a bottom-up revolution. I mean, it's hard to believe that Martin Luther King wasn't even 40 when he was assassinated. Right. Most people think he's a lot older, but he wasn't 40 yet. And he had been on the national scene for a long time. Ralph Abernathy, and the list goes on and on.
Yes.
But the young people in the colleges, whether it's anti-Vietnam, pro-civil rights, do you see that happening again today? I think you said you did, but I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly, that it's the younger people who are saying, we're going to get the ball rolling. Much like, quite frankly, the modern LGBT movement is younger people, the younger generation going, well, I don't know what you really felt about in the 60s and 70s, but this is the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And how important is it for people like me? It's hard to think that I'm older because I'm so used to being younger. But for people who grew up a little bit earlier, to allow those young people to have their say.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's crucial that we allow them to have their say, just as the three of us that are participating in this interview, at some point in time, someone allowed us to be at the table and to have our say. You're right. It is a bottom-up driven revolution, if you will, that we see happening before our very eyes. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that when we talk about, or we reflect on the civil rights era, if you will, and we talk about the incremental gains and the progress. Well, if you are a young person who all you've known is poverty and struggle, maybe you have had to deal with family members being incarcerated. Maybe you have had negative encounters with law enforcement. Talking to them about incremental gains and progress from the civil rights era falls on deaf ears. They can't relate or connect to that. All they know is their existence today. And so that's why it's so important that we hear them, we allow them a seat at the table, and we also play a part in sharing important lessons as well, because I'm a father of two young African-American men. I have a 25-year-old son and I have a 22-year-old son. Our 25-year-old is really leaning into this because for him, this is his civil rights moment. We talk a lot. He's good about studying. So he knows that there's so much he didn't learn in school that wasn't taught to him in his history classes. And so with that comes frustration, maybe even anger at times. I didn't know this. Why were we not taught this? So yeah, we gotta embrace them. We gotta embrace their energy. We gotta try to understand their approach, just as we hope that they will try to understand and embrace us as we try to share what the possibilities are, and that we can perhaps give them hope, because a lot of what we see right now is hopelessness that has transitioned to outrage.
So we're in a moment where there's a lot of white people in power.
Yes.
Who seemingly now is the moment that they're like, oh, I get it. Oh, I have a deeper understanding about what the Black experience has been. I'm sorry that I didn't know it before.
Yes.
But I'm getting it now. Mm-hmm. In all walks of our leadership profession, from sports to corporations to government to not-for-profit and philanthropy, there's a lot of moment right now. We're in a moment of, the light bulb has finally gone on in the heads and hearts of white people in power.
Yes.
How hopeful are you that is not just a momentary enlightenment, and that can be leveraged for real progress and real change? Are you feeling hopeful in this moment?
Yeah, I am cautiously hopeful because of conversations that I've been in the past week and a half. I don't think we can afford to not lean in, be honest, be genuine, and attempt to. We've got to address the ills that face our community, the challenges that struggling Black families, struggling families of color are dealing with. We have to deal with police reform and accountability. If we do not, I think people lose sight of history as things transition. We think about Ferguson. Most people, when they look back on that, they protested for about a week and then it was no longer on the news. That's not the case. They protested for over a year, whether it was big or small, might not have gotten media coverage. our young people are, and they've raised their voices loud enough for us to understand that they're serious about the need for major change and major change right now. And it's a fair position for them to have because, again, we have all of the data. We have all of the statistics. We don't need another study to know that our schools are struggling, that people are poor, people don't make livable wages. We know this. So now it's about what are we really committed to doing? And so for corporate heads, it's, commit to livable wages, commit to looking at how you deal with your hiring practices, and who gets promotions and things of that nature. Commit to doing better with your supply chain and how you engage minority and women-owned businesses. There are a lot of things that we already know what we need to do. We just have to be committed to doing them. And I think an important part of this is very much with the work that you're doing, Brian, with CICF and the mission change and focus. It's okay for white people to lean in and do the work. It's not just cut Tony Mason or cut a grassroots organization a check. No, lean in and see the work through its fruition. Show that there's a commitment to long-term investment and sustainability. Because I have been in those conversations, it just seems a little bit awkward for me to be a part of it or to lean in. And I do say this, I said, lean in just like Brian. But it's going to take all of us. It really is. And it's not a moment where you just write a check and walk away. It's long-term strategic planning, long-term investment. Because again, we're talking about a third of the community if we're talking about the Black community. But if you're looking at poverty as a whole, we're not just talking about the African-American community. The challenges facing the African-American community are the same ones facing the Latino community. It's facing poor whites, which oftentimes get lost in this conversation. And sometimes I wish, they had a louder voice as well. But all too often groups get pitted against one another. And
especially when resources are.
Especially when it comes to resources. Yes.
I have one more question.
Sure.
So I'm very fortunate that I'm surrounded at CICF by really brilliant people of color.
Yes.
And they tell me all the time that, a lot of these racist systems that we have in this country have been created over time by powerful white people.
Yes.
And if we're going to undo them or disrupt them or replace them, we need white people to lean in, like you said. I mean,
yes.
Not just white people.
That's right.
Every people, all people.
That's right.
But it cannot be done without powerful white people.
That's right.
And it seems like you agree with that assessment.
100%. We see young white people playing a major role in protests and demonstrations all across the country. And just as that's playing itself out at protest sites, we need the same thing to happen in the boardrooms all across not just our city, but across the country as well.
Classrooms.
White people leaning in. Classrooms as well.
Marian University is leading the way. I mean, they're a client, so I should disclose that, but they are well, they are. So it's not contrived. They're pushed to recruit more especially minority males into their teaching program and put them in positions of leadership in the classroom and in the schools and in the districts is unparalleled.
Yes. And see, education is a great example because, for the past, 10 or 15 years, the fight has been about traditional public schools versus charters. Well, they're all struggling. And poor kids attend traditional public schools. They're in charter schools. They're in private schools. Education is still arguably the number one civil rights issue. And so what are we going to do about that as opposed to siphoning resources off of one set of schools to support another? Our kids are in bad schools that are struggling, and many are struggling in part because they are under-resourced. It's no longer okay to say, well, resources and money are not the problem. I only hear that when it comes to things that impact people of color. I don't hear that in other spaces. So if we're committed to this city and where we need our city to go, because it's our city, and these are our people, we have to embrace and own all of it. If we're committed to going forward, then we need to do just that on a number of different fronts, and not just education. Because if we don't, I mean, what is Indiana without Indianapolis?
Well, Tony, thank you for, again, at an incredibly busy time in your leadership, making the time and space for this conversation with Robert and myself. And one of the things that we've become aware of at CICF is that, we need to play whatever role we can to making sure that there's more equity and power.
Yes. That
we need more people of color in power. And you do an awesome job of representing how powerful it is to have a black man play the kind of role that you're playing. And we need to help create a community where more black men and black women and Latinx men and Latinx women and every other hue and along the gender rainbow have power, because everyone, in our opinion, everyone has superpowers.
Yes.
And how do we become the community that really creates an opportunity for everyone to live out their superpowers? So thanks for your leadership.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
You're not off the hook. You got 5 questions. You ready?
Okay.
What was your first job?
My first job was at Wichita State University. Well, you know what? Now, are you talking about before?
Your first job.
First job. Okay, my first job was as a recreational sports programmer, youth programmer, if you will, in Evanston, Illinois at Robert Crown Community Center.
What was your first concert?
My first concert was a rap concert. It was held at the UIC Pavilion downtown Chicago. It had Run DMC, the Fat Boys, who else? It was a whole bunch of Houdini might have been a part of it, but I remember those.
This is my era.
Two.
This is Gen X, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. If you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
White Fragility.
By?
Robin DiAngelo.
Robin DiAngelo. I think it's a must read now for everyone.
If you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
Past event?
Any event in history.
Oh, any event in history. Let me come back to that one.
Number 5, if you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, whom would you choose?
2 hours off the record, whom would I choose? I would choose Barack Obama.
He has been a very popular choice. Along with George W. Bush, actually, has been a very popular choice.
Mm-hmm.
Witness any event in history.
That I would have been in Grant Park the night that Barack Obama got elected president.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, the Crown Plaza Hotel, Grand Hall, and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the law firm of Bose, McKinney, and Evans, and the Bose Public Affairs Group, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. Co-host has been Brian Payne of the Central Indiana Community Foundation, President and CEO, and our guest has been a true leader. And I mean that sincerely. I'm lucky enough to have known you for several years and have had many conversations. I've seen your work. Tony Mason, President and CEO of Indianapolis Urban League. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.